Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be making my first Season 7 Meta Champions tier list. The last one we made was all the way back in the Valor's End update for Season 6, and oh boy, it's a little bit outdated. Some characters got orbital striked down into D tier, while other characters have risen up through the ranks. We have a few new S tier characters. A lot's changed, and so it's time to make a new tier list now that I've reached Masters. I feel like that's a comfortable spot where I can safely talk about the meta now. But before we get started, I want to talk about the format of this tier list because it's very important, and I also want to give the disclaimer that this tier list is just my opinion, of course. I am not the end-all, be-all determiner of the meta in Paladins, and you are entitled to disagree if you want, and I encourage you to comment down below what you agree with and what you disagree with. All I ask is just that you keep it respectful. There's always a handful of people who are just really salty and venomous in the comment section of a tier list. They take it way too seriously, and they say some vile things. Don't be that guy. It's not that serious. It's just an opinion tier list on the internet, alright? So keep it respectful. You're absolutely fine to disagree. So now let's talk about the format of the tier list. This is going to be from the perspective of Masters level ranked. We're going to be assuming that you're good at the character. I think that's a pretty reasonable assumption for a tier list. And we're going to have 5 tiers this time. S tier, A, B, C, and D tier. In the last tier list, I had separated A tier into A plus and A minus tier, but I'm not going to be doing that for this tier list because I think having one unified A tier just makes things a little bit easier to read, and it just works better for this updated tier list. But now it's very important to actually clarify what the tiers mean, because there are some meanings behind it, and you should pay attention to this because if you don't, then you're going to be very confused why some characters are placed in certain tiers, so pay attention. D tier is for the characters that are absolute hot garbage, and you should not play them. And again, this is coming from Masters level ranked, so there will be a few characters that work better in the lower ranks like Gold, but this is not a tier list for Gold, this is a tier list for higher level ranked. So yeah, D tier, just don't play these characters, please. Just don't do it. C tier. And this is the one you need to pay attention to the most. C tier is the tier for characters that can be very strong, but they are very situational and niche. And so you don't want to pick them up all the time. You need a specific team comp or a specific environment for them to work properly. And when they work, they can be very, very good. It's just not all the time that you want to pick these characters. B tier is for balanced, as I always like to say. It's for the characters that are pretty average right now. You can pick them up, you can do fine, but they're certainly not the top performers. A tier is for characters that are really strong right now and are all around very solid, good options for you to pick up in ranked. And then S tier is for the characters that are pick or ban priority. They are the strongest characters in the game, the ones you should be focusing on either saving for your team or banning outright so the enemy team can't have them. And then one final note is that we do have an ordering sequence for the tiers. So we're listing the classes in the order of tank, flank, damage, and then support. That doesn't mean that tank is better than support. For example, if Torvald is listed higher than Grover, that doesn't mean Torvald is better than Grover. They're in separate classes, and so that distinction doesn't matter. However, the champions within each class are ordered based on their strength. So the character furthest to the left is the strongest, and the character furthest to the right is the weakest. So let's say I have Torvald ahead of Khan. Torvald would be better than Khan in the thought process of this tier list. But now with all of those heavy disclaimers out of the way, let's show you the previous Valor's End tier list real quick. You can pause the video if you want to look at this, analyze it in detail. This is kind of where we're coming from and what we're evolving from to see what the current Season 7 tier list is like. And now, let's get started. Okay, so up first we have the D tier. This is the tier for characters that suck. Don't play them, at least not in high-level ranked. Starting off with the supports, we have Saris and Genos, the two worst-performing supports in the game right now. Saris is going to be the controversial one because you're going to have a lot of gold players being like, oh, but Saris is so good. She's fine for learning the support class, and she certainly is a very reliable pick in those medium to low ranks. But for a high competitive level of gameplay, she just doesn't compete with the other supports because she spends too much time channeling her heal and channeling her movement ability and not really providing much value for the team apart from that. She does have her stun, she can do moderate amounts of damage, and her ultimate is certainly pretty good. But when you compare her to some of the stronger supports that we'll be looking at later, she really just doesn't cut it. And then next up we have Genos. Genos is a character who historically has been about buffing his team up and supporting them with things that aren't necessarily healing. But he doesn't do that anymore. Old Luminary from like multiple seasons ago is gone, and while he was the best healer in the game during like the middle of Season 6, he's been nerfed since then, and now he's just a really bad heal bot. His heals are not competitive with many of the other better healers that we'll check out later on the tier list, and then also he basically has no supportive capabilities like buffs, debuffs. He does have crowd control in the form of his Void Grip, but that's it, and there are just better supports out there than Genos at the moment. And if you want pockets, well, Corvus does that better, so there's basically no reason to pick Genos right now. Now let's move on to the damage category. We have 4 damage characters down here, all of whom get completely outclassed by basically every other damage character in the game. Starting with Omen. This guy used to be an S tier, and then they orbital striked him with a nuke, and now he's in D tier. They took away the 2 things that made him insanely powerful: Umbral Lance and more. And yeah, they have reworked both of those things. So Umbral Lance is a veritable throw pick now. It nerfs your fire rate, and then it doesn't really give you that much of a range increase. And then more doesn't do as much damage as it used to, although I guess it is a little bit more consistent now. But the main problem with Omen is his general consistency and range, due to the fact that his shotgun has a ridiculous spread and is ridiculously inconsistent. And it means that he loses poke battles, even in medium and sometimes even close range if you're fighting a skinny or evasive target. So there's no reason to pick Omen right now. Do not ever pick him in ranked. He is absolute trash, and he desperately needs some sort of buff or some sort of rework to make him viable again. Next, we have the 2 snipers. They both are pretty bad. They really got hurt hard by the Season 7 item changes, because both of them do exclusively weapon damage for the most part. 99% of their damage comes from their weapon. And because of that, and the fact that armor plating is way stronger than Old Haven in terms of its scaling and its accessibility, it means that these characters are now stuck with a very long time to kill. Because once you stack up armor plating and cause them to take more shots to kill you, that drastically increases the time it takes them to kill you, because they have such slow fire rates. And so they really aren't super competitive these days. They do have their quote-unquote good maps, like Frog Isle and Fish Market, but even on those maps, I feel like there are better options to play, and they're also pretty ridiculously easy to dive by a lot of the really strong tanks and flanks that we have in the game right now. So I just wouldn't waste my time personally with these snipers, and so I'm putting them in D tier. You could maybe justify putting them in C tier if you really are feeling generous, but I just don't think they're worth your time. And finally, in the damage class, we have Betty La Bomba. This is another one kind of like Saris, where I feel like a lot of gold players will be questioning this, because she is pretty good at just spamming and getting a lot of free damage. But in the higher ranks, she struggles to get value, because she's only good on certain maps where you actually force the enemies into tight spaces where they get hit by your AoE. Mobility really counters her as well. She is absolutely destroyed by a lot of flanks in this game, because she has slow arcing projectiles, and a lot of her other abilities, her hail bombs, her cluster bombs, are very easily avoided if you just have some dashes or some flight or anything like that. And especially when we look at some of the meta characters later on in the list, you'll start to see why Betty kind of struggles against all of them, because she's just not really equipped to deal with the type of characters that are meta right now. And she's also received a hefty amount of nerfs. She used to be a lot better, but they've nerfed fire rate disposition really hard. They've nerfed her damage in other ways, and so she's just not feeling as well as she used to. And I feel like nowadays she's just kind of a worse version of Dredge, and Dredge himself is a niche character. So we're putting Betty in D tier. Once again, you can maybe justify putting her in C tier, but I'm going to leave her in D tier for now. And finally, we get to the flank class. We have Kasumi in 7, which hasn't really changed since last tier list. Kasumi got a rework, and that's excellent, but she's still struggling to compete versus other flanks right now. I've only seen one player make her work, which is kind of sad. But yeah, she could receive a little bit of love. I think the main thing that really hurts her is her inconsistency with her primary fire. It's not the same as Omen's. She is more consistent than Omen, honestly, but she still has kind of finicky, buggy stuff going on with her primary fire, and I just don't really like that, and I think it is holding her back quite significantly, as well as the fact that her marking mechanic makes her pretty bad against some of the meta characters right now, because they can cleanse her marks. She doesn't do very good shield damage, and some buffs don't work on her properly, again due to the marking mechanics. So she's got a few issues that need to be hammered out. She has potential, but I'm still going to leave her in D tier for now. And then 7 also just got hit with the nerf hammer a bunch, and remains in D tier because I just don't like him. Okay, no, that's not fair. He is genuinely struggling to compete on the same level as other flanks right now because, well, he does have high mobility. It's really better suited to some maps than others, and his damage can still be good, but he is simply very, very, very squishy. And other characters, especially some of the meta characters, again, just have favorable matchups against him, and so he's not feeling super great. But the character that you might be surprised to see in D tier if you looked at the last tier list is Caspian. Just like Omen, Caspian got hit with an orbital strike cannon, and he died. Caspian got just some massive, overwhelming nerfs. They buffed him to an extraordinary degree towards the end of Season 6. They gave him the ability to carry his momentum on his dash, which everyone was asking for, and that's an excellent change. But then they also giga buffed his damage for some reason. And then, right after I published the tier list, they ended up nerfing his damage quite substantially, but then they also, for some reason, removed his win condition, which was his stun on Rogue's tempo, and replaced it with a slow, effectively kneecapping his ability to actually get anything done. At this point, there are characters who just do better damage than Caspian, either in terms of just completely outperforming him and having higher numbers, or being able to do so more consistently because they don't have to get as close as Caspian. And then yeah, the fact that he doesn't have his stun means that he's back to being in D tier. He's only either been in S tier or D tier, this character. He's never had time to rest in the B tier. It's very sad. I kind of feel bad for him. Now let's move on to the C tier, and it's very important that you heed my words. This is the tier for situational characters that can still be very, very good. You're gonna see, especially in the support roster here, some characters that might leave you scratching your head. All three of these support characters are very good. You just don't pick them all the time. You pick them in niche situations, or you don't pick them at all. But when they're picked in the right situation, they easily are A tier in terms of their strength. Starting with Grok. Grok is excellent for brawly type comps where you want a lot of teammates grouped up around his totems, because his totems are absolutely phenomenal. And he's also a character in the support class capable of dealing pretty decent amounts of damage too. Although he did get his damage somewhat nerfed with the removal of keywords, he's still very powerful in that department compared to other supports. It's just that, due to the way he heals, he's not reliable when you pick him in team comps that just aren't designed for him. And he can also struggle versus blasters, because if you destroy his totems, then he's not able to heal anymore, and so that can be a problem as well. And another thing to consider is that Willow is meta right now. I guess a bit of a spoiler alert for the S tier. And Dead Zone absolutely counters the totems. Put the totem down, put the Dead Zone on top of it, now the totem is useless. It's as simple as that. So, yeah, Grok, situational, but when he's picked in the right situation, he's very, very strong. The same can be said for Rey. Rey is a character who is really map dependent. She is A tier, if not slightly low S tier on a map like Bazaar, where she is able to heal through walls and provide excellent support for her team. And she's also excellent in double support comps because she provides a lot of utility, and she provides an immense amount of ultimate charge, which is really good for powering up her other support on the team, like Grok, for example. Grok has an excellent ult, and Rey really powers him up. So, yeah, Rey is absolutely excellent, but she struggles on maps like Timbermill, where she is not able to have teammates consistently in her ideal range. And yeah, she also, in some cases, can struggle to solo support because she's not a heal bot. She doesn't have the highest healing numbers, and in today's meta, in terms of the support class, that can be a bit of a rough thing if you are a solo support. But she is still absolutely excellent. You just gotta pick her in the right situation. And then finally we have Corvus. Corvus is the master of pockets. He is excellent, especially if he has a Torvald on the team as well. Get that double pocket going. And he's really good at enabling dive comps, because his marks allow him to heal flanks very consistently no matter where they are on the map, and he also provides other buffs like movement speed and damage reduction that really help out. But he struggles to heal tanks consistently, and he gets dove very easily, so he does have his counterplay, and he is pretty much used in those dive comps and those pocket comps, or not at all, right? That's kind of the situational element when it comes to Corvus. Now we have a few more characters that are a bit more straightforward. Dredge is, well, he's a blaster, he's a spammer, he's a siege character, and he's really good on ice mines, and maybe a few other maps where it's super close quarters, but otherwise you don't really pick this guy up that much. And he's also, in a lot of ways, very weak to flanks, because his primary fire is very, very tough to hit on fast-moving targets, especially those that fly. He does have Hurl as an option for consistent damage, but it doesn't apply Cauterize. And it does avoid armor plating because it is ability damage, but if they buy Arcane Warding for Hurl, then all of a sudden, it's pretty bad. So, Dredge is very situational, very niche, but I guess in the right situation he can be better than Betty, so that's good. Moji. Same sort of situation in the sense that she can be good on a map like Jaguar Falls, especially in the right team comp where you've got a decent amount of sustain, and Moji is able to play against characters where she can consistently get burst damage, but she does struggle in certain matchups, like against Koga, for example, because he can cleanse her marks, kind of similar to Kasumi. But yeah, she can, I would say, be generally better than Kasumi. I kind of think of them as similar characters because they're both very tanky, they both have marking mechanics, and they both can be very bursty given the chance. And then we have Buck. In the last tier list, I placed Buck in A tier. That was a mistake, I fully admit. He is still A tier in terms of his strength when he's allowed to shine in the right situation, going back to the idea of Corvus and dive comp, right? Buck is all about the dive. He is all in or nothing when it comes to the dive, and if he's allowed to dive successfully, he's one of the most oppressive characters in the game. However, when he's shut down by anti-dive characters such as Ray, Atlas, Torvald, etc., then he's useless and a detriment to your team, and so he's very situational. In the last tier list, I mistakenly put him in A tier just based off of his raw strength when he is good, not considering that C tier is a better place for him because he is so situational. So you only want to pick him in the right situation, but when you do pick him in that situation, he is busted. And then finally we have the tanks, Rom and Yaggaroth. Rom is actually up in C tier now from D tier because he's gotten some nice little buffs recently, especially to Enforcer, giving him that crowd control immunity on his dash. Very, very nice. And both Yaggaroth and Rom are very similar tanks in terms of their kind of brawly / hit and run style where they run in, make space. They're very good duelists. You never want to 1v1 these characters, but they do have a lot of counterplay. Their movement abilities can be countered by cripples, they're countered by percent-based damage, and just generally high damage, and so they're not perfect characters, but if you are good at them and you pick them in the right situation, they can still be a very valuable asset to your team, and it also really helps out when you have good team coordination, because both of these tanks can really shine if your team is actually able to play around you and play with the I guess, skills that you're using in the plays that you're making. Now we move on to the B tier. This is for the tier where the average characters are. They're decently balanced. They're nothing special, but they're nothing terrible either. Let's start with the two support picks. We have Pip and Maldamba. Maldamba has recently gotten some pretty nice buffs, mainly to his Mending Spirits, which now heals twice as fast, leading to him having more consistent and bursty healing output. And that really, really helps him out. He's still not as much of a heal bot as some of the other characters who can really pour healing into the team, but he does have extra utility in the form of his high self-sustain, his good damage output, if he's in a duel anyways. He still doesn't have like crazy high damage output, but he is able to very consistently defend himself from flanks, especially when you throw the stun into the picture and the fear as well. He can be very difficult to dive in that sense if you are good at Maldamba. He's a very high skill support, and when he's played well, he is a very valuable asset to the team, but he's also not, you know, super good to the point of being an A tier or an S tier support. And then we have Pip. Pip is another really good support if you know how to play him. He has very high healing output with Combat Medic, and he can also have very high self-sustain, and it can have a really skillful playstyle with Mega Potion, although its consistency leaves a little bit to be desired. His ultimate is also very, very good, although it does get countered by Unbound. That's also something that really applies to Maldamba. Both of them get heavily countered by Unbound. But Pip's slow is also a little bit better in Season 7 due to the crowd control item split, where you have to buy Sentinel for the slow, and nobody really buys Sentinel for the slow. So yeah, he's generally a pretty solid support. One of his biggest weaknesses has always been that he's super vulnerable to hit scans because he has a very large head, and he also doesn't really have much in the way of a defensive ability on the same level as something like Slither, where he actually gets some form of immunity. He can have pretty decent self-sustain with his potion, but that's just not the same as what some other supports can have, and so he can be very vulnerable to dives. But he is still a very solid support. Next, we get to the damage roster, and oh boy, there are a lot of damage champions in this class. Tiberius and Cassie are both just kind of... they're kind of nothing burgers in the damage class, I would say, in the sense that they're pretty mundane. They're not bad characters, not at all. But they're not good characters either. They're really just kind of there, in my opinion. They have decent damage output, decent survivability, decent mobility, but nothing really stands out about them in the current meta. They just exist. So, in B tier they go. And then next up we have Sati. Sati is a very annoying character. She gets on my nerves. But she is definitely a very reasonably effective character. She can kind of just spam out some free damage with the coin if you want, although that playstyle has fallen out of favor thanks to a nerf. I think a lot of people these days are playing Window of Opportunity, which can be a very powerful anti-dive tool, and a way to secure kills, because you just pop someone up into the sky, and it kind of acts like a pseudo root, because it cancels momentum, it can really interrupt certain movement abilities, and it allows Sati to land some very easy shots and potentially secure the kill. And she's also got very solid hit scan damage output, which is pretty nice. So, pretty solid damage character. In B tier she goes. Next up we have Xiaolin and Imani, two very similar damage characters. They pretty much have the exact same primary fire. Fireballs, arrows, they're the same in my book. And Xiaolin actually went down a tier from the last tier list, and that's because of the new item shop. Armor plating counters Xiaolin really hard, and compared to the way that Old Haven was back in the Season 6 item shop, armor plating just hurts Xiaolin more these days, and so he is less effective as a result. He really struggles into comps that are super beefy, with a lot of sustain, a lot of tankiness, and also damage characters that are able to buy armor plating and just take 3, sometimes 4 shots to kill from Xiaolin. And so he still can be a very powerful anti-dive and a very powerful anti-flank character. He's just not doing as well as he used to. And then Imani, on the flip side, I think she was in D tier on the last tier list, if I remember correctly. She has gotten a lot of bug fixes, and also some slight buffs, and that makes her much, much better than she was when I last ranked her on a tier list. And she still, in some ways, kind of struggles like Xiaolin, because, like I said, her fireball is the same as Xiaolin's arrows, so armor plating does hurt. But she also has Inferno Cannon and Frost Bomb. Frost Bomb is an excellent crowd control ability, and Inferno Cannon does ability damage, which is very nice in Season 7, because ability damage doesn't get countered by armor plating. And armor plating is the most popular item in the game, so they're kind of on even footing right now, I would say. And I believe both of them are seeing decently similar win rates too, if I recall correctly. So in B tier, both of them go. And then lastly, we have Victor, a very strong controller DPS, if you're able to just use that aim assist and go brrrr. But he is also, I would argue, one of the weaker controller DPS, in the sense that he is very easy to dive by flanks. He has no defensive ability, and he has kind of a crappy movement ability. It is consistent for traversal, but it, in some ways, very much struggles to get him away from flanks who have superior mobility to him. So the fact that he's very, very easy to dive like that makes me want to put him in B tier instead of any higher. Next, we have the flanks. We have Xin, who is the cockroach of the flank class, and Xin is another character who's kind of just there. He's very consistent if you need a consistent flank, but he doesn't stand out in any department apart from his survivability. His burst is pretty average, his mobility is pretty average, he doesn't have vertical mobility apart from his ult. His ult is also pretty average. He's alright, but he's no all-star. Then we have Lex. Lex has fallen decently. He used to be pretty darn good, especially on controller, but then they absolutely gutted heroism, and a while back they did also nerf discovery, and I think I factored that into the previous tier list too, if I remember the timeline correctly. So yeah, those nerfs have made him much less savory than he used to be. He can still be a very good flank who can put out a good amount of damage if you're using controller aim assist, right? But yeah, he's not as good as he used to be, and so B tier is the highest I can justify putting him. Then we have Vora and Maeve, two very cultured flanks. Vora is pretty consistent in terms of her damage output, she's got pretty solid mobility, and yeah, she's just feeling pretty good right now. Again, not a super all-star flank, but she's playable. If you're good at her, she can be very good, especially on a map like Timbermill, where her mobility really, really does shine. And then Maeve is in a similar boat. Pretty consistent burst damage, although she does get hampered pretty heavily by armor plating. And yeah, also pretty good mobility to boot, and decent survivability from some of her damage reduction cards. So an all-around very solid and balanced flank. And finally, we have our 3 tanks. We have Makoa, Inara, and Terminus in B tier, with Terminus seeing a slight improvement from the last tier list. Makoa, let's start with him, is a very strong tank because of his hook. His hook is one of the best abilities in the game, I would say. And if you can land it consistently and have consistent follow-up from your team, it is very lethal and very deadly. On top of that, his half shell can be a very consistent form of barrier. However, the key problem that Makoa faces is very similar to Pip. he has a giant head, and not as much health as a lot of other tanks, and not as much damage reduction either, and a lot of hit scans are very, very strong, and that really does hurt Makoa's consistency. However, he is still a very good tank. Most tanks in this game are just really freaking good right now. The tank class is thriving, as you'll see in a little bit, and Makoa's win rate is still very good. Fun fact, there is no tank right now with a win rate below 50% in Diamond level ranked. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. The lowest is Makoa with a 52 to 53% win rate, so he's still a good tank. He's just comparatively less so compared to other tanks right now. And ours in a similar boat in terms of being kind of a less savory tank than many of her other point tank counterparts, because she received some pretty heavy nerfs to Mother's Grace. It used to be very, very strong and made her one of the strongest tanks in the game, but since then it's lost effectiveness in terms of its damage reduction and also its increased healing bonus. And that means that she's less of a powerhouse and an unkillable machine, and so she, is just in B tier again. But Terminus is, kind of the real winner here, at least in terms of the tanks we've covered so far, because he's received a lot of very small buffs over the past year, and those have accumulated in him, having one of the highest win rates out of all the tanks, and a pretty decent pick rate too. He has one of the most powerful barriers in the game in the form of his Power Siphon, very consistent and very, very powerful. It can block an infinite amount of damage, and he has pretty good uptime on it now too, considering the last few buffs that they've given him. And he's also a very tanky tank, and well, he can have good bursts too if you hit a bunch of decimation charges on somebody, or calamity charges, whatever they're called. The one real problem that Terminus has always faced is that he is, at the end of the day, a melee tank. And that makes him in some ways pretty situational, although I still don't think he's situational enough to justify putting him in C tier, because that Power Siphon is just so gosh darn strong, and it can be really good in a lot of circumstances. Alright, let's keep it going with the A tier, the largest tier on this tier list. We have quite a few characters here who are very, very powerful, and this is where you can see that the tank class is thriving. Look at all those tanks, oh my goodness. Let's get started with the supports though. Lilith, very, very strong support, capable of putting out some of the most healing in the game. If you stack a full charge swarm or two and a hex on the same target, they basically don't die. If they have rejuvenate or a barrier to cleanse cauterize or any number of extra survival means. On top of that, she has the highest health pool out of any support, and very good mobility to boot. It's a pretty solid vertical jump with a very low cooldown, and her ultimate also just empowers both the self-sustain and the mobility, allowing her to really just stay alive very, very consistently, and also provide a lot of benefits to her team in terms of just the raw healing that she's able to do. And she gets a lot of extra kind of passive damage from the enemies sitting in her swarms, and she can consistently just lob out a few shots here and there as well. So she is a very, very powerful support if you know how to play her. There is a pretty steep skill requirement for Lilith compared to a lot of other supports right now, but if you can pull it off, she is excellent. Then we have Furia. Furia is such a weird support because they keep changing her. High Res, Evil Mojo is not happy with the support. That's my guess, because they've changed her and reworked her so many times over the past year. But she still persists as a pretty solid support. Solar Blessing is the new meta now for Furia, because Cherish doesn't provide really any benefits anymore. It used to provide much more consistent and powerful single target burst and better range on the right click, which made it worth it over Solar Blessing, and Solar Blessing also didn't used to have as many quality of life buffs as it does now. They've really enhanced Solar Blessing's ability to perform consistently. It used to, like a few years ago, force you to just stand in one spot underneath the beam, and it wasn't really as reliable. But now, the effect lingers after you leave the beam if you're an ally on Furia's team. Furia can also self-heal with the beam. It's also the only way to stop the beam on a target for extra damage now. There's just a lot of utility with Solar Blessing that really is shining right now in Season 7, and she still has many of the benefits that she had previously. She is one of the highest damage output supports, and she also has one of the best ultimates in the game, bar none, because she provides her entire team with a massive damage and movement speed bonus. So Furia is still pretty good. She's a bit shaky, and I wouldn't be surprised if they rework her next update again. But yeah, we'll just keep an eye on her. And I guess through all the crazy turmoil that's been happening with this character, she's still pretty solid, so yay! The last A-tier support is Aya, who is able to put out a very high amount of healing, while also being able to provide some additional buffs to her team in the form of damage reduction and movement speed, which is very, very good. And she can also be pretty tough to kill, because when she's using Luna properly as kind of a bodyguard, she has a stun, and she also has the ability to have some pretty decent damage output when you combine her primary fire with the damage from the dog. And so, she's an all-around very solid support right now, but not quite S tier material. Alright, now let's talk about damage champions. As you can see here, there are a few hit scans. Controller DPS, yay. Octavia and Vivian are kind of similar in that they don't have like a crazy high pick rate, but they do definitely win games if you plug in that aim assist controller on PC in particular, because they have very high hit scan DPS, and they also have other ways of supporting the team, either in Vivian's case being pretty tanky with her barrier, or in Octavia's case providing additional buffs to her team with her passives. So both of them can be pretty solid, and yeah, are great choices if you do have the luxury of aim assist. Then we have Drogoz, who is a very good damage champion. He does have quite a decent number of counters, which can make him less reliable, but the fact remains that he is still a very powerful damage character who's capable of dishing out gobs of damage. He has a good ability damage split, where if you buy armor plating for Drogoz, he still has good ability damage with his fire spit, and also his execute completely ignores DR entirely, so that's also really good. He has a very powerful ultimate when used properly. And so he's just a damage dealing machine, and he also has very good mobility, and if you play him smartly, you can also mitigate a lot of the hit scans that otherwise would counter a less experienced Drogoz player, so he's all around a very solid option. And then, for the final damage champion in A tier, we have Tyra, still a very good damage champion, even after the Hunting Party nerf, and right now she is very consistent in terms of her ability to basically become a tank, because her Mercy Kill build is just as good as it's always been. But now you can combine it with the much stronger sustain items in the new item shop with, you know, buffed veteran, buffed armor plating, a life rip if you want to be like that, cheaper nimble as well really helps her out. She really is a massive, I guess, benefactor of these item changes that happen in Season 7. So, yeah, very solid. Again, very good damage output as well. Just an all-around pretty good damage character. And then we have three flanks before we get to the tanks. We have Talus, Androxus, and Eevee. Talus has always been one of the strongest controller flanks, and that's because he has very high damage output and very consistent survivability thanks to his portal, which allows him to play very aggressively and still survive because once he gets low, he can just TP away. So, a very, very solid flank. Next, we have Eevee, one of the strongest flanks in the game on keyboard and mouse. She is capable of some very impressive mobility, and she does have very good bursts as well, and her ultimate is one of the best ultimates in the flank class for locking down a kill because it cripples and slows enemies. Very hard to evade that if you were playing a character like, I don't know, Saris in D tier. Oh, yeah. But she's not without her counterplay because, of course, anti-dive characters will counter her. She is very squishy, so characters like Xiaolin will counter her, even if she does buy some level of armor plating. And also, armor plating does hurt her pretty badly because she does do mostly weapon damage, unless you're playing Snow Globe and you spam ults. But even then, the Snow Globe damage isn't really enough to make up for the fact that, yeah, armor plating just sucks, man. It's not fun to play against. But despite that, she is still really, really good if you know how to play her, and so she deserves her A tier ranking. And finally, we have Androxus, the most popular flank in the game with the highest pick rate and the second highest ban rate out of all the flanks, and a pretty solid win rate too. He's all around a very high performer right now, who is very good if you're good at him. He's got that good consistent hit scan damage. If you play Defiant Fist or Godslayer, you have that extra ability damage, which, as we've mentioned so many times before, is really good in today's meta, thanks to armor plating. He's also got very good mobility, and his ultimate, again, is ability damage, so that kind of just got buffed in Season 7, unless the enemies happen to buy Arcane Warding for you. So yeah, all around a very consistent and high-performing character. And finally, we have the tank class, of which there are so many. Tanks are thriving in Season 7. Pretty much every tank is good if you know how to play them, and I, for one, am super happy to see it. I wish every other class was as balanced as the tank class right now. Like I said with Makoa, the lowest win rate in the tank class right now is a 52 to 53%. There is no character in the tank class who has a sub 50 win rate. It's just, it's so nice to see. And yeah, we're starting off here in the A tier with Ruckus, who is basically a big flank, so it kind of makes sense that he's next to the other flanks. Ruckus is capable of doing very high damage output with his miniguns and his missiles, and he also has some of the best controlled mobility in the tank class. He has vertical mobility, and he also has very good traversal as well if he chooses to use his dashes in quick succession. He's capable of navigating the map better than pretty much any other tank, especially on maps that have a lot of vertical platforms like Serpent Beach or Timber Mill. And that combination of high mobility and high damage makes him a very lethal off-tank, especially when played in coordination with another flank, a proper flank, who's able to really supplement his damage output and keep pace with him. And yeah, he's also got one of the best ults in the tank class for dishing out just crazy amounts of damage. So all in all, very good tank. And then next up we have Ashe. Ashe received a very nice buff to Slug Shot, where it now deals more damage. So you lack the AoE, but you now gain with Slug Shots the longest range in the tank class, I'm pretty sure, if not one of the longest ranges, I guess, and also a nice buff to your single target damage output, which makes her a very lethal tank. And when you combine that with her good levels of crowd control and also her ultimate, which can be a very nice stun if you know how to use it, and also provides immortality, she can be a very oppressive tank who's very good at making space and can be especially good on certain maps and in certain situations thanks to that range. So yeah, Ashe, very, very solid. Next we have Barrack, one of the better point tanks in the game. He is capable of having a lot of defenses and also putting out a lot of damage. Kind of similar to Ashe, he has very, very good range with the talent Tinkerin, although not quite as good as Ashe's, but what he lacks in range compared to Ashe, he makes up for in damage, having more damage per second than Ashe, dealing 600 damage with Tinkerin, so still a very, very good tank. Next we have Nyx. I just have to keep singing the praises of all these tanks because there's almost nothing bad about them. Nyx has, again, very high damage output, not nearly as good range as the last two tanks we covered, but still very good consistent damage output. She has that percent-based damage on royal presence. She's very, very tanky and has very good crowd control. Her slow field with, what's it called, the Rift Slash. That is better in Season 7 because nobody buys Sentinel, and Sentinel is what you need to counter the slow. So you can build for a slowing build with like extra slow strength, and you can have a very, very powerful slow. And on top of that, it's also a giant AoE cripple with the Rift Slash talent, so that's pretty good as well. Her ultimate can be pretty decent for the stun, although admittedly it's not the most consistent. All in all, she's just a powerhouse of a tank with one of the highest win rates right now. And then we move on to Azan, who is really just a solid, dependable tank in almost every situation. He's got powerful innate DR, he's got some of the best mobility in the tank class, especially helped by the fact that it's vertical mobility as well, so you can traverse those high grounds on Timber Mill, Serpent Beach, etc. He's also got very consistent burst damage, he's got the walls, he's just very, 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 very consistent, and that's what I like about Azan. He's consistent, he's powerful, he gets the job done. And then finally, at the top of A tier for the tank class, we have Atlas, one of the strongest tanks in the game if you can play him well. He's another one of those characters who requires a big brain to use, because you have to think in 4D. You have to think of where the enemies are going to be, you have to time your rewinds, you have to predict stuff. He's not the most mechanically demanding, but his ability demand, in terms of skillfully placing his abilities, is off the charts. But if you can manage it well, holy crap, the value this guy gets. He's got the barrier that, with Temporal Divide, can literally cut the map in half, or if you want more consistent uptime on the barrier, you can maintain very, very good uptime with some Chronos, with the car that reduces it by 5 seconds when you hit the rewind, and the barrier blocks infinite damage. So, very, very good. His rewind gives him a second life, and his rewind, offensive rewinds, his offensive crowd control, is among the best crowd control in the game if you know how to use it. He is immensely valuable as a tank, and so he goes at the top of A tier. And finally we have the S tier, which is looking a bit crowded because a lot of champions have been buffed to the point that they genuinely belong in S tier. But of course we start with two familiar faces, Ying and Grover. Not much has really changed with these two characters since the last tier list. I don't feel like I need to elaborate that much. Ying is one of the most powerful heal bots in the game, and now her ultimate allows her to cleanse crowd control on her teammates for 1 second when she pops it, which actually makes her a very good counter to, well, Khan, who's later on in the S tier, but also generally just a lot of crowd control abilities she can block now if she times her ultimate well enough. making her just a very, very valuable support in today's meta. And then Grover is just a really consistent support. He's got really good burst healing, really consistent healing. He's got really good mobility with Vine Tech, and also really good consistency on the Vine thanks to his cooldown cards. And then he has also got some of the best self-sustain in the support class because all of his healing is applied to himself. He's got one of the best healing ultimates in the game, and he does consistent damage throughout the match because, well, hey, he doesn't have a channeled heal. He just shoots once every second, constantly throwing axes and helping out the team. And his crippling throw is one of the easiest cripples to land in the game, very consistent, and he's just such a solid support, and so he's the easiest S tier of my life. Now let's talk about the damage champions. Bomb King is the only familiar face up here. Bomb King is just super consistent. He's a very good carry character if you know how to play him, because he does very good burst damage. He has some of the best mobility in the damage class. He can also be reasonably tanky with some cards and items, and he's generally just an all-star damage champion. I mean, he's really good at tank busting, he's really good at busting down DPS, flanks. As long as you're good at him, and you also have good ping, he is a very, very good damage champion. And I just recently published a guide on Bomb King, so if you want to learn all the best tips, tricks, and loadouts for this guy, go watch that after you're done watching the tier list. Next up we have Willow, and let me check. What placement was she in the previous list? Oh, right, D tier. She kind of traded places with Omen and Caspian, and that's because of a massive, massive mobility buff that she received, where she finally has a new passive where she is able to float. She can use her wings! Finally! Oh my gosh. What that allows her to do is flutter up into the sky, create her own high ground, and kind of just float around like Drogos while blasting enemies from the sky with her also buffed Blast Flower, which now does a pretty solid amount of damage. And it's that combination of a Blast Flower buff and a mobility buff that makes her very, very good. And it's also especially good, this mobility buff, because it acts like an extension to her ultimate. You can basically fly really high into the sky with your ultimate, and then once it's over, you still get several seconds of flight as you just slowly drift to the ground. And so, yeah, she is really, really nice right now. She's got a very good win rate, very good pick rate, ban rate, all of it. She's a very solid damage character. Yeah, Willow's made an excellent comeback, and I definitely recommend playing her. Anyways, next we have Leon, who, yeah, she fell out of the meta for a little bit, but she's back. Oh my gosh. They gave her some very powerful buffs at the start of the season, and have since toned them down a little bit, but she's still very strong. They buffed her base damage up to 425, they buffed her health up to 2100, I think, and that leads to her having very strong bursts once again, and also very consistent tank busting pressure compared to what she used to have, because when you increase the base damage of her rifle like what they did, it thereby makes precision a lot better, because precision is a percent-based buff that's applied on top of the base damage, right? So precision just proportionally got a lot stronger, and it actually makes her a very consistent tank buster as long as you don't have to face against shields, because precision doesn't stack against shields because, I don't know, it's a stupid game rule, honestly. I don't like it. But yeah. She's very good against DPS, and she's also pretty good against tanks right now, and that health buff also made her less of a pushover when it comes to being dove, and so she's just really good right now, and also really consistent because she's a hit scan, and she also has that auto-aim, so very, very good damage character. The most banned character in the game right now, fun fact, she's actually banned more than Torvald. I can't believe it. But, yeah, definitely play Leon if you get the chance, if she's not banned. Oh boy. Now we have some flanks to talk about. Vatu is, well, once again, a familiar face. He is the strongest flank in the game if you are good at him on keyboard and mouse, and that's because he has very powerful damage reduction, some of the best mobility in the game. I would argue the best tactical mobility in the game. Seven has the best mobility in the game for traversal, but Vatu has the best mobility in the game for tactically dodging shots, ambushing enemies, and controlling who he picks fights with, and that ability is very powerful. And he also has very good damage, very, very solid burst combo, and also, keep in mind, the Shadow Bombs and the ultimate both are ability damage, so he's got a nice ability damage split too. And of course, the ultimate is very consistent in terms of its uptime, one of the quickest ults to build in the game, and it's very good at securing kills, because it's an 800 damage stun, you can combo it with his other abilities and very quickly get a kill. So Vatu has always been a very good flank, and that remains the case in Season 7. And then we have two controller flanks. Oh boy. They nerfed aim assist too, by the way. I've heard some controller players say that they don't even feel it, so Yeah, there we go. But yeah, Skye is up here in S tier. What the heck? Well, Smoke and Daggers is back on the menu. That's why she is in S tier. Smoke and Daggers got the buff of a lifetime in the most recent update. It now allows Skye to be invisible again, which is huge. And I'm very happy that's the case. I've been asking for that for a very long time, pretty much ever since it got removed. But they also buffed the healing output, and one thing that I think everyone overlooked is that in between the time when they initially removed the invisibility from Smoke and Daggers and then added it back, Skye got a second charge of Smoke Bomb, meaning that you can really have consistent, powerful uptime on the Smoke Bomb, and that means a lot of healing for your team, and also a lot of movement speed for your team, because she has the card, Dissipate I believe it's called, that gives 40% movement speed while you're in the Smoke Bomb, which is even better than Grok's movement speed card, and everyone knows how good Grok's movement speed card is. So it's a very, 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 very powerful talent right now, and that's coupled with the fact that Skye has very good close quarters damage. She has the Poison Bolts for consistent damage versus tanky targets. And yeah, she's feeling really good. She had a bit of a shaky start to the season due to the Illuminate change, but she has since recovered from that, and she's feeling very good once again. And then finally we have Koga. Oh my goodness. Probably the best controller flank if you're just looking for a really dependable flank who's good at surviving and also good at damage output. They recently buffed Adrenaline Junkie back to the previous levels of energy generation that it had, with the cost that you can no longer build that energy versus shields. But I don't think that really affected him that much, because just look at his win rate. Oh boy, he's really good. Really, really good. And the dashes allow him to have very consistent survivability, because they cleanse Cauterize, as well as any other negative status effects, like marks from some of the lower tier characters, stuff like Tyra's Hunter's Mark, Ray's Spirit Link, etc. And that is insanely valuable for him to have, especially with such high uptime, because he's able to generate energy quickly with Adrenaline Junkie, and he has 3 charges of the dash just by default. So that's really good. But on top of that, they also, a while back, buffed the claws so that they pierce through targets, allowing him to have really good AoE damage now, which, yeah, is a pretty cool buff, but it's also pretty darn strong. So yeah, if you're in a crowded hallway and you've got a bunch of deployables and other stuff to chew through, Koga's actually a really good quote-unquote blaster now. And if you play a hybrid build with Koga, you can kind of just get the best of both worlds. Koga's just really fantastic right now, so he goes into the top of S tier for the flank category. And then finally we have the tanks. This is probably the most clear-cut portion of the S tier that I can possibly imagine, because, well, not much has changed, except for Fernando. He's here now, so that's pretty cool. And I guess we'll start with Fernando, because he is the one who got changed the most. Fernando got the old effect of Aegis put into base kit. Yeah, it's very, very, very strong. And if you don't know what that means, basically, by default, previously, Fernando had a 12-second cooldown on the shield, which made it very inconsistent when you were playing as Scorch or Formidable. Scorch had plenty of benefits in terms of its damage output and its extra ultimate charge rate because of the increased damage output, but it was limited by the fact that the shield was much less consistent. You had to run Towering Barrier at 5 to get consistent cooldown reduction on it, and even then it wasn't as good as Aegis. Aegis allowed him to change that shield into a resource meter that you can toggle on and off at will, and it just passively regenerates when it's not active. And so by putting that into base kit, all of a sudden now Scorch does incredible amounts of damage, incredible amounts of ultimate charge, and you have the consistency of the Aegis shield, allowing him to be very aggressive and still block a ton of stuff for his team. And that buff skyrocketed him into S tier, because Fernando has always had one of the best ultimates in the game. Make everyone in a giant circle around him immortal for 4 seconds. I mean, come on, that is busted. And Scorch, with Aegis and base kit, allows him to build that ultimate insanely quickly. If you go watch some of my Fernando games that I have uploaded on the channel, you see that oftentimes in the first point fight, I am the first one to build my ultimate on my team. Which is crazy, because Fernando's supposed to have pretty low ultimate charge to compensate for the fact that his ultimate is busted. So, yeah, it kind of broke him. And it also allowed him to be one of the best damage champions in the game, as I like to call him. You can do a ton of damage with Scorch if you line up the fireballs properly, and that extra ability damage burst from Scorch makes him a very consistent killer in the Season 7 meta with the item shop, even though his Flame Lance is technically the lowest DPS weapon in the game. Yeah, it's just crazy how this character works, man. So, he's got a super simple kit, he's super dependable, he can be a good main tank, he can be a good off tank, he's just really good. So play him before he gets nerfed again, is what I'm trying to tell you. And then, of course, we have our two pretty much constants in S tier at this point, Khan and Torvald. I put Khan slightly below Fernando, and that's because due to the fact that Ying is also meta right now, and her ultimate got changed to have that 1 second of CC immunity, that actually really hurts Khan. Because now, if you play Khan versus Ying, Ying is able to pop her ult after Khan ults somebody and completely save them, making one of the best ultimates in the game all of a sudden one of the worst. And so, Khan's still S tier, regardless, but yeah, I figured Fernando's a bit more consistent in the ultimate category, and so I put him 1 tier above Khan. But yeah, Khan has the highest damage output in the tank class with Storm of Bullets in terms of just raw weapon damage, especially if you hit headshots. It is disgusting. He has a shield which allows him to cleanse Cauterize and negative status effects, and that allows him to get very good consistency out of his Battle Shout, which is a massive burst heal that also gives him complete damage immunity. He also has a stun on his dash, admittedly not the best mobility in the tank class, but that stun can be very good for locking down kills if your team is paying attention. And again, obviously, his ultimate is one of the best in the game. I mean, come on. You can pick up an enemy from pretty much anywhere on the map, hold them, and just have your team shoot them and kill them. It's a guaranteed kill if you do it right. Or, if you want to save some time, you can throw them off the map if you have the opportunity to. So Khan is an excellent tank, all-around very good team player, very lethal tank, and very good at confirming kills for his team. And then, Torvald. Let's rattle down the list of everything that's good about Torvald. Let's see, okay. Very high damage output, very good range, one of the best crowd control abilities in the game for locking down kills, really high self-sustain, that also stops the enemies from generating ultimate charge and credits, and he has the ability to pocket teammates, giving them basically the ability to tank 1 extra shot from the enemies, and possibly also heal them a little bit, and possibly also give them some ammo and movement speed if you're feeling quirky like that. And, due to the way that his heal card and his cooldown reset card works, means that if you pocket somebody and then they get a kill, you get an elimination, and you get that pocket back faster, you get that nullify back faster, you get that recharge back faster. The only bad thing about Torvald is that he doesn't have a movement ability, but even then, Eldritch Speed is a card. It gives him pretty much, 50% movement speed at level 5 for 4 seconds? You just pop recharge and you zoom. And it also can't be crippled because it's a movement speed card activated on an ability that's not a movement ability. And this character got nerfed too. He got some pretty massive nerfs to the protection, and it doesn't really matter. Like, yeah, the protection is worse now. Objectively, it's worse. But it's still so good. It's just... Torvald's just like a perfect off-tank. He's so insanely valuable that he is the second most banned character in the game after Leon right now. And yeah, he's also got the highest win rate out of any tank. One of the highest win rates in the game, period. Really good pick rate. He's just phenomenal. You pocket a good flank, and you have the good S tier, DPS up here, right? And yeah, you nullify whoever they're shooting at, and you just win. You just win. It's Torvald, baby. He's disgusting. And yeah, what a way to wrap up the tier list. So yeah, that is the full Season 7 tier list, at least for the start of Season 7 here. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments section down below. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Please let me know. And of course, keep it respectful. Remember, it's just an opinion tier list. It's okay if you disagree. You don't have to berate me. I'm not going to berate you. Keep it civil, all right? Don't be that guy who's nasty. You don't want to be the nasty guy. You just make a fool of yourself. But yeah, I think, honestly, it's pretty interesting to see how the meta has changed. Some characters got orbital striked into irrelevance, while other characters have gotten some massive buffs, and the S tier is now more crowded than it used to be. And I feel like, in general, the game is slowly trending towards being more balanced. I mean, look at the tank class. Every tank is viable for the most part. Rom and Yag are a bit sketched, they're a bit more situational, but every tank is good for the most part. No tank has a sub 50 win rate. That can't be said for any other class. So that's really awesome. And the fact that they are starting to buff some damage characters is really good, because the damage class has been suffering for a while. Statistically, in terms of the win rate, pick rate, it's the worst performing. Many of the characters I put in D tier have sub 50 win rates in terms of the damage class. So if we could really see some love towards those weaker damage characters, that would really pull up the balance and make the balance tighter and make, more characters viable. That would be good. And in general, yeah, I'm quite happy with the meta right now. Like, there are some impressive things, there are some S tier things, obviously Torvald exists, but yeah, I don't feel like there's anything that's ridiculously annoying and oppressive at the same time, compared to meta's past, where Curse Revolver and Droxus was meta. 7 meta. Please let us never return to a 7 meta. Not fun. Not fun at all. Or God forbid, releases on. Let's not do that, okay? So, yeah, that's my overall verdict on the meta. And, yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you never miss an upload from me. Check out the Twitch channel, check out the Discord server linked in the description down below. And if you want to support the channel, please go on over to the Nexus to make your next crystal purchase. Nexus.gg/AndrewChicken is the place to go. You can buy crystals, the Season Pass, DLC, and more, and a portion of the proceeds go to supporting the channel. It's officially affiliated with Evil Mojo, and yeah, I'd really appreciate it if you would check it out. With all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.